and invite you to an invigorating discussion on Quad, conflict or cohesion. Let me start off this conference by talking a bit about the GPI QUAD Forum. The GPI QUAD Forum is an initiative of Global Policy Insights, which is a centrist policy think tank, and which is aimed at fostering understanding of the Quad grouping and the nuances around the same. The focus of the Quad GPI Forum is to initiate public diplomacy around the theme of Quad. With this target in mind, the Quad Forum aspires to start public dialogue around the Quad Forum, as well as act a repository of knowledge for everything that concerns the Quad. So if you visit our website, you will find various articles of interest focusing primarily on the Quad and a bit largely on the Indo-Pacific. In our inaugural session a few months back, we had a brilliant discussion around the purpose of Quad. Now we take that understanding that we built in our first discussion further, and we explore today the future as well as the present conflicts as well as the cohesions that exist within the Quad Forum, and how the global geopolitics that is unfolding is impacting the security architecture in the Indo-Pacific, and particularly the role of Quad in it. The evening will unfold as follows. We have some brilliant speakers, starting with our keynote speakers, which is Ambassador Vishnu, Prakash, and Dr. Zack. Then we will have a youth leaders forum, followed by an inaugural Quad Cafe, and then an expert panel chaired by Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, followed by a concluding thank you note by Arpit Chaturvedi, who is also a co-founder of the GPI QUAD Forum, just like me. Now, I will just take a couple minutes to introduce our keynote speakers. Firstly, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash is a career diplomat. He is a law graduate, that too a gold medalist, and a career diplomat of the 1981 batch, IFS batch. He retired as India's High Commissioner to Canada in 2016. Hitherto, he was the ambassador to South Korea, official spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs, and consul general to Shanghai. He has also held various diplomatic positions in Tokyo, New York, Moscow, Islamabad, Vladivostok, and Cairo. Mr. Prakash did a sabbatical with the Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies in Hawaii. Presently, he is a foreign affairs analyst, an advisor, and a noted columnist specializing in the Indo-Pacific region. He is associated with prominent think tanks, educational institutions, and writes regularly for national and international publications. He is a sought-after speaker and an expert panelist on both Indian and foreign TV channels. We are privileged to have you with us, sir. Welcome. Introducing our second keynote speaker, Dr. Zack Cooper. Dr. Zack Cooper is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, where he studies US strategy in Asia, including alliance dynamics and US-China competition. He also teaches at the Princeton University. He co-directs the Alliance for Securing Democracy and co-hosts the Net Assessment podcast. Dr. Cooper is currently writing a book that explains how militaries change during power shifts. And this is particularly relevant in today's age. Before joining AEI, Dr. Cooper was the Senior Fellow for Asian Security at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and a Research Fellow at the Center for Strategic and Budgetary Assessment. He has also served as an assistant to the Deputy National Security Advisor for Combating Terrorism at the National Security Council and as a Special Assistant to the Principal Deputy under Secretary of Defense for Policy at the Department of Defense. Widely published and widely acknowledged, we hereby welcome Dr. Zack Cooper to our Quad conference. Welcome, Dr. Cooper. Without further ado, I would like to, at this moment, invite our first keynote speaker, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, to shed some light on the theme of the conference, Quad, Cohesion or Conflict. Welcome, Dr. Prakash.
Thank you very much, Shashank. Very gracious of you. Greetings, friends from India and from all corners of the world. It is a pleasure to interact with you at this virtual Quad conference. My compliments to Arpit Chaturvedi, Shashank, Shekhar, and his brilliant team for at the GPI QUAD Forum for conceptualizing and hosting this conference. Quad. It is impressive that in a mere 3 years, beginning September 2019, when the first foreign ministers meeting was held in New York, giving the Quadrilateral Forum or Quad the much needed impetus, it has become one of the most talked about and analyzed multilateral initiatives in the world with far-reaching implications, strategic, political, security, and economic. It would be no exaggeration to state that formation of Quad has been one of the most significant geopolitical developments in recent years. The speed at which it is striking roots is both heartening and unprecedented, despite being a nascent forum whose agenda is still evolving. Yet it is not surprising that Quad means different things to different people and nations. In his opening remarks at the Quad summit in Tokyo, Prime Minister Modi termed it as a force of good. Most nations see it in the similar refrain, but not China and not Russia. Beijing had once dismissed it as sea foam, and that indeed what it seemed to be when it was effectively put to rest in 2008. Resurrected in 2017 and gaining salience by the day, Beijing now views it as a clique or even an Asian NATO. It believes that Quad is meant to contain it. Interestingly, China rarely finds a mention in any of the Quad statements, although it looms large in the background during any discussion. Not many had foreseen that the grouping would gain traction the way it has, given the sheer diversity of the 4 member nations in terms of size, geographical location, history, geopolitical outlook, and level of economic development. Even so, there is a touch of tentativeness about the forum. With every change of government in any of the 4 Quad nations, especially the US, there is a question mark about continuity or the level of commitment of the incoming leader. That said, it is important to reflect over what has brought these countries together and keeping them so. Simply stated, it is a commonality of interests and challenges. It is also not incidental that all 4 member nations are vibrant democracies having an abiding faith in the rule of law, in peaceful settlement of differences and co-prosperity. These are, so to say, the pull factors, but there is also a major push factor, namely the concerns about the rise of an expansionist China, which is habitually engaged in aggression, manipulation, and intimidation in pursuit of its foreign policy objectives. There is little doubt that President Xi Jinping wants to create a hierarchical China-centric world order or a regional order where it is the sole hegemon with other countries occupying the subordinate position. This arrangement doesn't work for India, nor does it work for other countries. Such an arrangement would be based not on rule of law, but rule of power, as has been evident from Chinese activities in the South China Sea, Sea of Japan, armed standoff with India, wolf warrior diplomacy, predatory economic activities, military buildup, and gross human rights violations. So the big question is, can Quad slow or stop China? Frankly, the jury is still out. A lot would hinge, notwithstanding the rhetoric, on the real agenda and effectiveness of Quad. So what is then the Quad agenda? Has it met expectations of member nations? Are they on the same page? Is the grouping representative enough, or should it be expanded? At the outset, I can say that the main raison d'etre of Quad was a common desire, need, and commitment to ensure freedom of navigation and overflights, and to maintain a rule-based, free, open, inclusive, and coercion-free Indo-Pacific region. Thus, maritime security in the broadest sense was and should be its primary objective, for there is a pressing need. A real-time, sustained, and substantive attempt is being made to alter the status quo and set aside unclassed norms by China. Yet there is a bit of ambiguity about the direction Quad is moving. On the one hand, there is AUKUS, which enhances the military muscle and reach of Australia, one of the key Quad countries. On the other hand, at least on the surface, the security component of the grouping and its agenda seems to be getting diluted. The Biden administration has displayed remarkable commitment to the Quad and given it tremendous momentum and visibility. Under President Biden's watch, 4 Quad summits in less than 18 months have been held, 2 in person and 2 virtual. At the same time, the focus seems to be shifting more to economic, health, environment, and non-security, though undoubtedly critical issues such as climate change, COVID vaccine, infrastructure development, clean energy, capacity building, critical and emerging technologies, democracy, etc. To be fair, issues like cybersecurity, terrorism, and HADR are also on the radar, but there is more emphasis on the so-called positive and practical agenda to statedly deliver tangible results in the region. Granted, this approach makes Quad more attractive and acceptable to the Indo-Pacific nations, all of which are conscious of Beijing's sensitivities and do not want to jeopardize substantive economic and political ties with the Asian power. That applies to Quad nations also, which similarly have significant economic and other interests in China. The stated policy of the US is to confront, compete, and cooperate with China. The same holds true for India, which has tried hard to qualitatively deepen ties with the West without ruffling too many Chinese feathers. In the initial years, even the word Quad was not a part of the Indian official lexicon. However, Chinese behaviors forced India's hand, making her less reticent. In some ways, India's case is sui generis, being the only country with a close to 3,500 kilometer long volatile land boundary with China called LAC, or Line of Actual Control. It's well known that since May 2000, we have been dealing with an armed standoff in eastern Ladakh at a high altitude, which is high altitude, treacherous and frigid terrain. Today, the entire India-China LAC is alive. India is conscious that even in the event of a border conflict, we would basically have to fend for ourselves with Quad and other friendly countries possibly providing military hardware as also diplomatic and intelligence support. No nation is likely to deploy boots on the ground to tackle China. As such, India has made and will continue to make every effort to manage her relations with China in such a way that antagonism does not degenerate into permanent hostility or enmity, even though it is evident that cordial, leave alone friendly relations with China, which has consistently ignored and even undermined India's core interests, are high. Menon notes, and I quote, India is now far more willing to be seen working closely with the United States in the region. Short of an alliance, a further strengthening of Indo-US defense, security, and intelligence links is now a certainty thanks to recent Chinese actions. And this aspect is worth underlining. Unlike Australia and Japan, which are American allies, India is a strategic partner. She is open to voluntarily commit to an issue-based alliance, but will not be willing to cede her strategic autonomy, whether it pertains to national security, purchase of oil, or ties with Russia or Myanmar. Undue pressure from any quarter may not be conducive to further strengthening Quad agenda. In other words, some differences within Quad countries are natural and should be respected. Last year, in a media interview, US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken expressed serious concern at the continued Chinese aggressive actions in the Taiwan Strait, cautioning that it would be a serious mistake for anyone to try and change the status quo by force. He reiterated, we have serious commitment to Taiwan being able to defend itself. Well, if such an admonition had any impact at all, Beijing has hidden it well. A noted Brookings scholar cautions that a promise by America to defend Taiwan does not mean that it could defend it. That is because America has had multiple, sometimes conflicting goals to deter China from attack, yet to preserve good US-China relations and to discourage pro-independence forces within Taiwan all at once. And hence this wink and nod approach towards maritime security in the Indo-Pacific region. And therein lies the rub. What China sees are essentially words, even though I may add that these are initial years and the agenda is still evolving. I am trying to be candid to provoke a discussion, taking a stance which could be seen as provocative, but in my view is also realistic. Chinese trade with most countries continues to grow. Its aggression continues to go mostly unchallenged. True, there is some effort to reduce dependence on China for sensitive products and also make it more difficult for it to access cutting-edge technology. Yet it is debatable if it has caused any real pain to China, notwithstanding its shrill protestations. Ironically, even though there is consensus that China is the biggest threat to the prevailing world order, the West has decided to make an example out of Russia. If the intent was to kill the chicken to scare the monkey, that has not and is not likely to happen. I would argue that some tough decisions would have to be taken by Quad, which would certainly entail costs. For Beijing to take it seriously, the free world cannot make much headway by having their cake and eating it too. Quad nations need to make up their mind. Consistent expansion of the agenda could perhaps make Quad more acceptable, but I would think may not make it more effective. It is also doubtful that Quad will be able to deliver on all commitments, which could lead to disappointments, allowing Beijing to gloat, told you so. The grouping may soon realize that it is not so easy to win a popularity contest. To sum up, they say a good beginning is a job half done, and Quad in its second avatar has been off to a flying start. But the road ahead would be far more uphill and the task at hand far more challenging. It would help if more like-minded countries, such as France, in my view, could be onboarded. It is also hoped that future Quad leaders are as far-sighted to stay the course. Thank you for your patience and all the very best with your deliberations.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Prakash, for a very insightful keynote. Without wasting time, I would like to invite Dr. Zack Cooper to talk about the emerging security architecture, given China talking war, and as Ambassador Prakash said, the Quad seemingly diluting its security concerns. I hereby invite Dr. Zack Cooper. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Shashank. It's wonderful to get to see you again and to see everyone. This is such a fantastic group, and I'm delighted to be able to join you this morning. So I really want to just build on some comments that that we've already talked about this morning, and I think the reality is that the Quad sometimes is made out to be a bit more than it is. Which is not to say that the Quad is unimportant. In fact, I think the Quad is maybe the most important development we've seen in the Indo-Pacific region over the last 5 years. But I think it's dangerous to think of the Quad as addressing too many different issues. So I think there are really 4 main issues that are at contest in the Indo-Pacific: security, economics, technology, and what I would call global governance issues. And I don't think the Quad is well positioned to deal with all 4. In fact, I really think the Quad is a security coalition focused on China. And let me try and make the argument for why that's the case. When you look at these other issues, take economics, right? You see that actually these are not necessarily the 4 countries that might be ideal to lead on economics. The United States and India are 2 of the only countries that are left out of the current regional trading blocks, right? The CPTPP and RCEP. On technology issues, we have very different views, right? You know, data requirements for data localization are quite substantial in India. Meanwhile, the United States has a very different approach to technology. The Europeans, again, are in a very different space as well. And finally, on global governance issues, we've seen, I think, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that of course, in that area as well, we have somewhat different views. But I don't think that needs to undermine the Quad, because I think what the Quad really is a balancing coalition against China in the Indo-Pacific. And if we focus on that mission for the Quad, what we see is that it, in fact, has the 4 countries that are willing to push back in the military domain against China. Of course, India has been forced to do this, given what's going on at the Sino-Indian border the last few years. The United States is pretty active in this area as well, given its treaty commitments. Japan, given what's happened in the East China Sea over the last decade, and increasingly Australia, given the economic pressure that it has been under over the last 3 years or so. And so what we see, I think, is that the Quad countries are the 4 countries in the region that have been the most willing to push back in the security domain in Asia against China. Now, I think if we focus on that area, what we see is exactly as Ambassador Prakash said, that the most important areas for cooperation within the Quad are areas like maritime security. So I was very encouraged by what we saw in the Quad leaders meeting on May 24th, this announcement of the Quad's maritime domain awareness effort to use satellite-based radio frequency data and provide that not just to the Quad countries, but importantly to Southeast Asian countries, to Indian Ocean countries, and to Pacific Islands. I think that is exactly the kind of activity that the Quad should be doing. It is focused on security, and yet it also provides public goods to the rest of the region, which is critical to demonstrate that the Quad isn't just about these 4 countries, but it is in fact about something much more broad, which is about maintaining the security order that currently exists across the Indo-Pacific region. So I think that's the core mission of the Quad. Let me say, I don't think that means that the Quad is, as I said, unimportant, right? I think it does acknowledge, however, that as Foreign Minister Shekhar has said, multipolarity is the core of the Indo-Pacific region. And so we should expect that the United States and India and others are going to align differently on different issues. So I think we will have different views on certain economic issues and technology issues and global governance issues. And I think that's fine. In fact, I have been very encouraged by what we've seen in the bilateral US-India relationship over the last few months, I think Washington and Delhi have been actually quite good at managing our different views on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It has not really damaged the relationship. I know there's a lot of commentary in both the American media and the Indian media about our respective positions. But when I talk to government officials from both sides, I think there's a real understanding that, yes, we have slightly different views on these issues, but our relationship is not defined by our disagreements, but rather by our areas of agreement. And that, I think, is what the Quad has been so remarkably good at the last few years, is finding areas of agreement and really building on them. So I think the challenge is now for the Quad to deepen cooperation in the security domain primarily, without getting too distracted by trying to either expand the Quad to other countries or to other issues. I think this is going to be difficult, right? We're already seeing Quad working groups on a variety of issues, everything from supply chains to vaccines to potentially even climate. But I think the real focus for the Quad is security, and I think the closer it hews to that area, the better it will do. So I'm going to leave it there and look forward to hearing more about the discussion later in the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Zack Cooper. We took away the key points that you mentioned, right, with that the focus should be squarely on security, and the fact that you kind of rephrased the theme of our conference, that Quad currently is defined by cohesion in spite of the conflicts within, right? So it's not either or, it is cohesion in spite of the conflicts, and the focus needs to be squarely on security, and that was what Ambassador Prakash was also alluding towards. So with that, I will use that as a segue to invite all our listeners into the first panel discussion, which is a youth panel discussion, wherein enthusiastic foreign policy enthusiasts, as well as students, as well as young professionals in the field of diplomacy and international relations will engage in a robust discussion, which will be moderated by Mr. Bhavdeep Joshi, who is a research analyst in the GPI QUAD Forum. I hereby invite Bhavdeep to take over the proceedings and kickstart the very intriguing youth panel discussion.
Thank you so much for the comments, Shashank, and extremely privileged and honored to be here at the conference of this GPI QUAD Forum on the timely agenda, Quad, Cohesion or Conflict. I welcome everybody from our esteemed panelists to our Quad youth leaders and all our guests to this conference. Moving on, just to reiterate what this panel discussion would look like, I would first be asking all our Quad youth leaders to be going ahead with their opening remarks, post which I will be taking up targeted question and answers with particular Quad leaders. And in the end, we'll have a short 10 to 15 minute Q&A session from our audience. On that note, I would like to proceed. India's refusal to condemn Moscow for the invasion of Ukraine has grabbed eyeballs since the very start of the war. As the US-led Western world order continues to lobby world powers against the Russian invasion, India has kept itself away from such measures and instead taken an independent stance in dealing with Russia, which remains its major defense and energy partner. In doing so, Delhi has displayed a realpolitik approach in dealing with the conflict by prioritizing national interest and pushing for the resolution of the crisis via diplomacy and dialogue. Now, on this particular note, I would like to ask all our Quad leaders to come up with the opening remarks, wherein over time, the Quad leaders, as Ambassador Prakash and even Dr. Zack Cooper have mentioned in their comments, that over time, the Quad leaders are now understanding India's stance on Ukraine. But with the fact that the Russia-Ukraine war is continuing, what sort of role do you think India can play in promoting diplomacy and dialogue between Kyiv and Moscow? And on this very note, since the war is continuing, do you see this particular divergence on India's stance on the Russia-Ukraine war become something that Quad will need to engage more on in the future? I would like to invite Upma to please go ahead with her opening remarks on this.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to this distinguished audience. And thank you, GPI QUAD Forum, for inviting me. The topic of today's conference, Quad Cohesion or Conflict, is very timely as the leaders of the Quad just completed their 4th meeting and the second in-person gathering in Tokyo. The resulting joint statement after the meeting highlighted the importance of the Quad as a force of good, with a positive agenda to make the Indo-Pacific region more resilient in the face of myriad challenges. It was clearly visible in the joint statement that Quad has expanded its agenda, and the focus now includes global health security, counter-terrorism cooperation, commitment to deepen cooperation on infrastructure, need to address climate change, highlighted Quad cybersecurity partnership needed in a highly digital world. The meet focused on harnessing critical and emerging technologies to enhance the prosperity and security of the region. ASEAN's centrality and importance in the Indo-Pacific region was clearly visible in the joint statement. Maritime domain awareness space were the areas that were discussed for future cooperation among Quad countries. It becomes necessary to expand agenda of the Quad while the world is coming out of the pandemic and amidst the ongoing Russia-Ukraine crisis. At the same time, it is important to discuss whether expanding Quad's agenda strengthen the position of the grouping or weaken its cohesion, given divergences in the national interest among the Quad nations, especially when specifics are dialed in. Quad is still work in progress. Secondly, I would like to highlight the global developments which led to regeneration of Quad. In a rapidly changing world, COVID-19 crisis, the return of Taliban, ongoing China-India border dispute, the invasion of Ukraine by Russia triggered the need to regenerate Quad in 2021. India can be seen as a main driver in pushing Quad's agenda today, and United States did a good job by catching up. President Biden attending that in-person meet at Tokyo. It was a clear message by US that it can manage Russia and China problem at the same time. Also, amidst ongoing Ukraine war, Indo-Pacific region is equally important to US. This has certainly given a boost to US old allies in the Indo-Pacific region, and US has been successful in keeping the trust of old allies and partners in the region. Now, if we see if we discuss Quad today, it's very important to also discuss the shift in Indian foreign policy over the years. India's position on Ukraine crisis is widely criticized, as 3 Quad nations stand on Ukraine crisis was different than that of India. This poses a threat for the Quad unity. Yet, it is also evident that they are willing to work together to resolve those differences. Now, for how long India can form this balancing act, can walk on the tightrope, is yet to be seen. India post-pandemic is seen as a significant power in the world due to its vaccine Wave 3 initiative. I feel while discussing India's role in promoting Quad, its bilateral ties with other Quad members, its national interests, it's important to analyze the shift in India's foreign policy under Prime Minister Modi's government. India has certainly shared the old non-alignment policy and has shifted towards issues-based alignment. India prefers multi-alignment, taking on global responsibilities, acting as a constructive player, and projecting its distinct personality. India's long aim then is to be a unique bridge between established and emerging orders, a bridge between different worlds. The goal is to become a leading power from a rising power. Lastly, we cannot ignore China. I would like to say that Quad is certainly not anti-China. It's not all about China. At the same time, China cannot be ignored while discussing Quad, as a common interest of Quad countries is to respond to Chinese aggression in the Indo-Pacific region. But we must not forget that Australia is China's 6th largest trading partner. Australian dollar would be at risk if relations with China deteriorate. China and India two-way trade increased by 43% in 2021. India and China are partners in New Development Bank, share common vision for a multipolar world together. We have BRICS meetings this month. Both support principles of climate justice as evident in COP26. We share occasionally cooperative relations with China. US-China trade exploded in last 2 decades. President Trump did try wielding tariffs in effort to reshape bilateral relationship. President Biden wants more of a multilateral approach, and is still crafting its response. Then how Quad can reduce countries, nations' reliance on China must be discussed and analyzed. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Upma, for your comments. Moving on, I would just like to remind all our Quad leaders to kindly limit their comments to 2 to 3 minutes in the interest of time, since we have an experts panel lined up as well. Moving on, I would like to now invite Mr. Tavistan to begin with his comments regarding his opening remarks regarding the same. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Patif. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all, depending on where you're calling in from. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us, and thank you, GPI, for having me on this panel. My name is Tavis. I'm from Singapore, and I'm currently a Master's in Public Policy candidate at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. For my opening remarks, I would like to briefly cover 3 main points which situates India in the larger geopolitical context. So the first, the role of minilaterals in the region. And the second is India's role in the Quad, and third, ASEAN as an institution. ASEAN is 10 individual member states and ASEAN centrality. So first, the role of minilaterals in the region, and specifically, we've been talking about the Quad and AUKUS, but there've also been other minilateral partnerships such as Australia, India, Japan, the United States, Australia, India, and Indonesia, Australia, France, and India, Italy, Japan. Now, when we look at the Quad, and as mentioned by previous speakers, the Quad is seen as a balance against China's growing assertion in the region. However, the Quad's agenda also includes connectivity, telecommunications, supply chain, cybersecurity, and within the maritime domain to maintain a free and open Indo-Pacific. These minilaterals have been responsive and reactive, but it's also important for minilaterals to be proactive. However, in doing so, power should also be wary not to cast geopolitics and dichotomies being the West versus the rest, or democracies versus authoritarianism, that will only sow division and cause greater assertion. Now, when we look at India's role in the Quad, it's a partner amongst allies, right? It's important to note that Australia and Japan are US treaty allies, while India is a strategic partner. What India's role is in the Quad, I think, is still yet to be seen. And India's recent non-alignment, although a cause for concern, I think it's not surprising. Unlike the treaty allies, India's alignment has always been with its own interests. And because the nature of strategic partnerships is fundamentally different than that of a treaty ally, we should expect and anticipate future non-alignments as well. India's External Affairs Minister, Shashank, recently spoke at the US-China-led axis on 3rd June and reiterated that it's not necessary for India to join any axis, and that India is entitled to make its own choices, which will be a balance of its own values and interests. That India is not really sitting on the fence, but rather India is sitting on its own ground. However, non-alignment need not be a bad thing. In fact, I think that strategic non-alignment might actually be key to avoiding miscalculations and mutual aggression. In a way, India can act as an internal counterbalancer to ensure that responses are measured and things don't go too far. And finally, ASEAN as an institution has 10 diverse member states and ASEAN centrality. So ASEAN is not a security partnership. It's not like the EU. It does not function like the EU, and its genesis was not like the EU. ASEAN's interests and the interests of ASEAN member states differ at times, but ASEAN has a common purpose, a common vision, and a common goal. It's to build a strong, prosperous, stable, and rules-based ASEAN. And that means that adherence to principles, international law, and the UN Charter is important. ASEAN centrality, a common trope that has begun to gain traction again in recent years. It's something that, according to Amitav Acharya, professor of international relations, he notes that ASEAN centrality is synonymous to ASEAN as the driver, the architect, the nucleus, or the fulcrum of regional cooperation in the wider Asia-Pacific. So how ASEAN centrality plays out vis-a-vis the Quad and India's non-alignment is important, and it's something that I'm sure we can discuss further later on as well. So with that, I will conclude my opening remarks and I hand the time back to Bhavdeep. I look forward to what I'm sure will be a robust discussion. Thank you one and all.
Thank you so much, Travis, for your comments. Moving on with our next speaker, I would now like to invite Mr. Nicholas Veles to the floor and come up with his opening remarks. Just to shortly introduce Nicholas, he's currently an incoming graduate student of international relations at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, Washington, D.C., and is also currently the presidential fellow at the Wagner College. Over to you.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. Definitely saved me the troubles of doing so. I'll keep my opening remarks brief. I just want to say I really do agree with the opening remarks of the key speakers. I think they succinctly and quite eloquently discussed the role of the Quad, and especially how a lot of people have been overemphasizing its role and what it should do. Zack remarks about how the main focus is balancing China and the region. And with that being said, I think we have to realize that the Quad does not necessarily have to agree on every single thing. We need to realize what the end goal of the Quad is, not necessarily on every specific small issues. So going to your question, I think India's independent stance and divergence definitely has the potential to become a divergence. We must constantly remind ourselves that the Quad is still a very nascent partnership, which has only had 2 in-person summits so far with this this current iteration, and that the US and India have not always had the most amicable relationships, whereas India and Russia have a long-running and deep strategic, military, and economic one. The Quad must still take further steps in earning India's confidence that the partnership truly has its interests in mind when it creates a free and open Pacific Ocean. Therefore, at this stage, lest the Quad fail as it did in its initial iteration, when Australia left in 2008 due to its fear that the partnership would drive it away from China, its then and now principal trading partner, it must not undermine each other's national interests by forcing them to coalesce into a consensus on every single issue. That being said, I believe India's independent stance on Ukraine can actually bolster its and the Quad's role in promoting diplomacy and dialogue between Moscow and Kiev. It has enabled itself to bridge the gap between Russia and the other Quad members, which can prove vital in assuaging potential flashpoints that are likely to occur as the war continues. Moreover, I believe India's stance can demonstrate that Quad is not an Asian NATO set on challenging the sovereignty of any rival states, but rather a grouping of equal partners that are converging their ideas on how to uphold the international rule of law. So with that, I'll give the floor back to you.
Thank you so much, Nick. Thank you so much for your comments. And yes, as you pointed out, we will be moving on to these particular issues as we move ahead with the conference. Just a reminder for our audience, I would remind everyone that we'll be opening up the Q&A session for this particular panel soon. So I would just recommend that each and every person who has a few questions for us, please keep them ready. And once we open the chat box, please feel free to put your questions ahead there. Now, moving on to our next speaker, I would like to call upon Ms. Tamari to begin with her opening remarks regarding the same. Just to shortly introduce Tamari as well, Tamari has been a GPODS fellow with the Global Policy Insights and is also the Youth Program Coordinator at WAP2G. And she's also currently pursuing her Masters of Science in International Studies at the Northeastern University. Over to you, Tamari.
Hello, good morning, evening, and thank you for all being here. I would like to look at my opening remarks from the lenses of Russia-Ukraine conflict, India's role in it, and India's role overall in Quad. So among the world's leading democracies and critical allies, only India took a strong stand against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. New Delhi has maintained strategic public neutrality towards Russia despite its discontent with Moscow's fight. UN Security Council and United Nations General Assembly resolutions denouncing Russian aggression in Kiev have been abstained from, and it has so far declined to explicitly accuse Russia of the crisis. Many Americans, including President Joe Biden, Biden's administration, have been disappointed by India's neutrality. This has slightly affected relationship with other Quad members, though not in an effective manner. On the other hand, even though India in recent years has been actively exploring closer ties with its traditional allies in South Asia, it has also been strengthening its economic and security cooperation with European states. Now, I would like to go on India's role in Quad and how India has helped overall. So on the other hand, New Delhi has adopted a stance on regional security and peacekeeping that is quite ambitious. It has supported the African Union's effort to deal with crises in Sudan, Chad, Darfur, and Côte d'Ivoire, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. India has also actively participated in African peace operations. India recently joined the Quad Plus One format for African Great Lake region. India has remained a permanent member of the UNSC, but in the UN General Assembly, India has not taken any active initiative to promote its agenda. India's strategy in global politics is that of balancing among the Quad as an independent participant. And this could be debatable, but from time to time, it tends to lean more towards one of the participants. So.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tamari, for your comments. Just to remind everybody again on this panel that we'd like you to limit your opening comments to 2 to 3 minutes. Moving on with our next speaker, I would like to invite Mr. Rohit Sainarayan, who is currently the founder and director for the Indian Forum for Public Diplomacy, to please begin with his opening comments. Over to you, Rohit.
Thank you very much, Bhavdev. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm good evening and good morning to all of you. It gives me immense pleasure to be part of this academic session, and thank you for having me. An understanding of categorical doctrine of non-alignment and how does it affect the intra-Quad relations needs an understanding of India's position in the current Russia-Ukraine war, and how is, I mean, what are the implications in the future. First, did India take a position in the war? Did India take a side in the war? And the answer is yes. India did take a position in the war, a position that emphasizes on urgent cessation of conflict and return to the path of diplomacy. India did take a side in the war, that is India's side, not a side that has been categorically defined by the rest of the world. And a natural question that arises out of this position is, how is this justified? It's very important to remember that non-alignment is not non-interference or indifference. India hasn't expressed cynicism or indifference towards the conflict. It has actively engaged with both sides. Hence, I would like to argue that India is not sitting on the fence. India is sitting on its ground. India is not sitting on the fence. It is reaching out to both sides of the fence. In order to, India has chosen not to adjudicate Russia's invasion over Ukraine, because in order to do so, it has to either identify Russia as a perpetrator of the war, or it has to exculpate Russia as a victim of NATO's expansionism towards the east. And it is important to remember that regardless of either of these two positions, India is going to be at the receiving end in this conflict. Siding with the US means that you have to say goodbye to your major security partnership with Russia, whether we are talking about BrahMos, whether we are talking about S-400 or A230 Rafale manufacturing, or siding with US on that point means that I'm sorry, siding with Russia means that you are going to face CATSA sanctions from the United States. So since any of these positions is going to come at the cost of India's interests, India has chosen to be neutral in the face of this conflict. And it's also important to remember that wherever India needs to condemn, India did condemn Russia. When Bucha happened, India was one of the first countries to call for investigation. So I would like to argue that India's position is not strategic ambivalence, it is deliberate strategic calculation. So to move on, how does it affect intra-Quad relations? When India is acting as an agency of diplomacy with multiple players centered around a particular conflict, it reflects a greater multipolar world, and it reflects India's multi-alignment position. So I think whether we are talking about Japan, Australia, or US, or the West, or European Union, for that matter, will become more adaptive to this changing world order. So if US is under the opinion that India's position is prompted by Russian dependence on Russia, I would think that US will look at India's position as an opportunity and not as a liability, and rather help India diversify in its defense imports. So I only think it's a matter of time until quadrilateral grouping will engage more with each other, and there will be more deliberation towards a greater understanding. With that, I would like to close my remarks. Over to you, Bhavdeep.
Thank you so much, Rohit, for your comments. Extremely well put. I would now like to move on to our final panelist, Mr. Amya Joshi, who's currently a research analyst at Global Policy Insights and is also a qualified chartered accountant and has also been a GPODS fellow with the Global Policy Insights. Over to you, Amya.
Thank you, Bhavdeep, and namaste everybody from India. The first part of Bhavdeep's question kind of asked whether India can play a role in promoting diplomacy and dialogue between Kyiv and Moscow. So in the words of our External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, India has chosen a side, and that is the side of peace and non-violence. India, as my co-panelist Rohit said, India continues to press for the immediate cessation of hostilities. It has also condemned the massacres and the civilian hostilities happening in Bucha and other parts of Ukraine. The Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi, has spoken to the presidents of both Russia and Ukraine and called for dialogue and encourage talks between them. India has also categorically said that it will be glad to assist in the matter of promoting dialogue and diplomacy between the two parties. So yes, India is more than willing to assist and mediate in resolving the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. As to the question as to whether the current Ukraine war will be a major divergence between India and other Quad countries in the future, I would look at it from the point of view that Ukraine has made the issue of Quad more relevant, because now countries see parallels of or probably predict that parallels of the Ukraine situation might happen in the Indo-Pacific as well. So where analysts in Europe and North America see the question of Ukraine, I probably see the question of Solomon Islands. So the question is just as relevant. It is just that the entire community of nations is so focused on Europe and on Russia in particular that they probably tend to ignore events happening in other parts of the world, such as the Pacific Islands. That is a very critical and strategic part of the world, but we often tend to ignore that region altogether. So I believe that Ukraine is critical in bringing the Quad together. In the words of the White House report itself, the White House describes Quad as a premier grouping on the Indo-Pacific and not in every other part of the world. So while NATO is a military alliance, Quad is not a military alliance, and it might not be in the near future as well. I think we should not conflagrate Quad and NATO, because NATO is, after all, a transatlantic military alliance that is a relic of the Cold War. Quad is a relic of is representative of the 21st century and its aspirations and all that comes along with it. While China is the elephant in the room, Russia has never been the elephant in the room. Russia is always an oft talked about topic. The entire purpose of NATO was to control the erstwhile Soviet Union. So I believe that it is wrong to conflagrate Quad and NATO and bring them together, because both of them have been built for completely different purposes. The Quad is not an anti-China grouping. It is a concert of like-minded democracies who, with its flexibility and its informal approach to things, will ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amya, for those extremely insightful remarks. I will now be moving on to specific questions for our specific panelists. So moving on to my first question. My first question is actually to Rohit and Tamari. So either one of you can start taking off this question. So the joint statement by the Quad leaders in May last month, the joint statement, while not mentioning China explicitly, does mention that the Quad opposes any unilateral and coercive measures to change the status quo in the region via militarization of disputed features, dangerous use of coast guards and maritime militia, and disrupting offshore exploration activities of other countries in the region. Now, in this particular context, what sort of future role do you see India undertaking in dealing with the Chinese aggression in the maritime domain while being in the Quad, especially vis-a-vis the South China Sea and the rising maritime footprint of China in the Indian Ocean region as well? Either of you can take it up, Rohit and Tamari.
Yeah, would you like me to go on?
Rohit, please go ahead.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so Bhavdeep, if you look at what's happening in the South China Sea or Indian Ocean for that matter, and if you're talking purely in terms of security dynamics or economic dynamics. We see many countries looking India as an alternative to the Chinese model. Look at everywhere, the BRI has not given much returns. Many countries identify China as a self-controlled, status quo-driven hegemon, while many countries also see India as a country that deals more with partnership at the benefit of both countries' interests. So, what could India do? We see more engagement with multiple nations across Asian countries. We see engagement with within quadrilateral grouping, and we have also seen the Quad Plus. What I think in the days to come we can see is more and more deliberations, more and more narratives, that probably tries to challenge Chinese position. I would also look at this conflict or divergence mainly as narrative warfare. It's all about which narrative wins, which narrative takes over, and how do we justify or unjustify Chinese position, and how do we put forward our deliberations as a counter narrative to China. So that is how I would like to put it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rohit. Tamari, would you please like to add something to this?
Yes, so India's take on China is very important, and also I did appreciate India coming as Eastern European, so I did appreciate India coming and kind of helping Russia, Ukraine, not helping, but being involved in that. So as far as adding something, as a result of continuous skirmishes along India's disputed border with China, India's foreign policy has been significantly reoriented. And I think it also needs to keep reorienting and being involved more in Quad in order to globally be more involved and have this kind of a neutrality, and also have their own stance, which they're India's kind of doing already, having their own stance in global community. For maritime security, India launched the SAGAR concept in 2015, the Indo-Pacific Ocean Initiative in 2018. So this was one of the steps that India could have taken into being more recognized. And like my colleague said, Russia, Ukraine kind of is taking a scene, or kind of taking the spotlight from everything else. Measures taken by the United States are designed to restrict Chinese aggression on the seas. So I think India really needs to get close to United States instead of trying to take the sides with Russia or Ukraine, because this conflict has been ongoing for a very long time, and it may sometimes damage the reputation for India or Quad itself. After India's involvement, the Quad became the worldwide platform for ministerial discussion and venue for global cooperation, which Quad needs to be more and more involved and having more of closer relationship with United States, and not kind of becoming friends with enemy, which is China. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Tamari, for your comments. Moving on to the next question, which I would actually like to point towards Upma. Moving forward now, Australia, US, and Japan have often displayed their willingness to be a part of New Delhi's Atmanirbhar Bharat initiatives to make India self-reliant in a bilateral way. Now, as India continues down this path, forging multilateral partnerships regarding the same has also become very, very important for New Delhi. Now, in this particular regard, how do you think India can leverage the Quad to push forward with the Atmanirbhar Bharat agenda? And also at the same time, how do you think the Quad countries can help India to become more self-reliant in the future?
Thank you, Bhavdeep. Thank you for your question. So India and other Quad countries share common interest in the region, as well as share similar problems in the region. So Japan and India have territorial disputes with China, and both Australia and India they share security issues with China in the Indo-Pacific. Then India can definitely leverage the Quad to push forward its Atmanirbhar initiative. So I would like to highlight bilateral relations here: India, Australia, Japan, Australia, India, Japan, India, and US, India. So if we talk about bilateral ties between India and Australia and Quad, due to Quad, India has come closer to Australia. And now Australia and India want to cooperate in counterterrorism, mining, refining and critical minerals, cybersecurity, infrastructure financing, maritime security, space exploration securities. So Australia access to bases on Andaman and Nicobar Islands, it's yet to be discussed. And Japan is seen as an irreplaceable collaborator to promote development and modernizations. Japan is partnering India in key sectors, including infrastructure, technology, innovation, startups, and more. And also, India can take advantage of Quad by coming closer to US as a potential technological power. So US is eager to strengthen India's technological capabilities for defense and securities. So New Delhi needs to create an internal environment for such partnerships with all the Quad members, and India can deepen its bilateral ties through Quad. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Upma. Moving on to my next question, which is actually directed towards Nicholas, and it's a very important one. Now, there's this very important debate that has been doing the rounds with regards to the Quad since the very time it came on to as a resurgence. China's aggression has been cited as one of the major reasons for the resurgence of Quad. And time and again, it has been widely debated whether the Quad can rise above the China challenge and move beyond. Now, while I completely understand that this debate is extremely important, I would like to press on with a more important question, that how do you think the Quad can balance containing China on one hand and moving beyond it to focus on other important geopolitical issues and, you know, sort of strike a balance between the two? How do you think this balance can be something that the Quad can achieve in the future?
Well, thank you very much for posing that question. I think it'll lead to many insights. I don't think it has to be seen as a Quad balancing containing China and focusing on other multilateral geopolitical challenges. For doing the latter, I think contributes to the former. As the Quad cooperates on issues such as global health security, climate, critical and emerging technologies, cyberspace, and infrastructure, it's creating an environment in the Indo-Pacific where China has less leverage in advancing its ambitions and coercing smaller nations into fulfill its military aggression. One can argue that recent developments that have favored Chinese interest regions, such as its security agreement with the Solomon Islands and alleged naval base in Cambodia, is due to a general lack of attention afforded to these smaller nations by countries in Quad. In the case of the Solomon Islands, while China has a prominent presence with the embassy in the capital with a robust staff, the US has only recently decided to reopen its embassy in February. If the Quad members make their presence known in the region by collaborating on geopolitical issues and maintain its international rule of law, will not only offer the country's region a better alternative than China's coercive and unfair infrastructure and trade deals, which the most prominent example being the Belt and Road initiatives, which includes debt traps, corruptions, labor conflicts, and environmental degradations. But it also may embolden those nations to stand up against China's aggression. Consequently, China will find it much more difficult to impose itself in the region. So therefore, I think cooperating on key issues such as, again, climate and infrastructure goes hand in hand with balancing China. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Nicholas. And as you rightly pointed out, that there's a lot of need to focus on infrastructural projects. And this brings me to a very, very important question that I would like to ask you, Tavis, that the Quad time and again has also laid a lot of focus on ASEAN centrality and its involvement in the Indo-Pacific. Now, IPEF is yet another example of how serious the US and its Quad partners are in incorporating ASEAN into its economic fold. Now, in this particular regard, how do you think that India can leverage the Quad and IPEF to forge stronger relations with the ASEAN? And given that the IPEF still remains to be negotiated, what do you think could be the major areas of economic cooperation between India and ASEAN and all the Quad nations? And if you could just spread a bit of light on these particular issues.
Right, thank you, Badif. So I think two points. The first would be ASEAN centrality, and the second would be IPEF, right? We've noted that IPEF is not a free trade agreement. IPEF is a framework, right? And the second would be ASEAN centrality. So I'm going to take us back a little bit to Davos at the end of May. So I'm gonna quote PM Hun Sen of Cambodia, who's also the ASEAN chair. So he said, and he made us a really clear point in Davos that there are many initiatives targeted towards the Indo-Pacific, right? Such as Japan's free and open Indo-Pacific, and the US Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, and the EU's strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific. However, any initiatives in the Indo-Pacific should serve three purposes. So the first, it's peace, security, and development. The initiatives cannot be against any country, as ASEAN is not aligned with any one country. Again, ASEAN's 10 diverse sovereign states, right, coming together as one institution. It must serve ASEAN centrality as proposed by Indonesia on ASEAN's outlook on the Indo-Pacific. And the point that he made quite clear as well is that ASEAN cannot just support other initiatives. ASEAN has its own initiatives, and others should also support ASEAN's initiatives, right? ASEAN needs to be cautious and must not just follow outside mechanisms. I think that was what you were saying, with the backdrop that there's a lot of conversation about we have the East and we have the West, with the global North and the global South. When we talk about Asian issues as being resolved by Asians, you're again drawing these dichotomies being who is in Asia and who is not in Asia. So on the topic of outside mechanisms, there's a growing sense that the unilaterals like Quad and AUKUS is skirting around ASEAN centrality and merely paying lip service to ASEAN, right? Now, when we think about the region's interests and the dichotomy it faces, Lin Kwok, a senior fellow for Asia-Pacific Security, speaking at Davos, noted that this dichotomy between the United States as a security provider and China, not just for current economic opportunities, but future economic opportunities as well, draws these countries within Southeast Asia together as well further apart, depending on where their interests are aligned. But going back to your question, how can India then leverage the Quad and IPEF to forge stronger relations with ASEAN? I think India should discern for themselves how they can support individual ASEAN member countries in ways in which they need to be supported, noting that ASEAN is made up of 10 diverse countries with varying levels of development, right? Which is also why when we think of technology, when we think of global supply chain, and we think of emerging new tech, and we think of even having digital partnership agreements, it's so difficult to have a sort of congruence between all ASEAN nations, because the level of technological expertise as well as the level of development varies within ASEAN itself. But an ASEAN-India FTA was signed in 2010 and 2019. Trade between India and ASEAN was worth about US 86 billion, but that figure has since declined by 14% to 65.6 billion in 2020. But nonetheless, India remained one of ASEAN's largest trading partners as well as FDI investors, and that is significant, right? So India plays a big part in this region. But when we think of ASEAN centrality as a region, perhaps we should reframe the question not to how the US and Quad can incorporate ASEAN into its economic fold, but rather how can the US and Quad augment ASEAN's economic initiatives in the region. Now, I think that'd be a much fairer way to depict, understand, and perhaps rally behind what we truly understand as ASEAN's centrality. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Travis. Extremely insightful thoughts there on this particular issue, which remains one of the most debated and one of the most key aspects that need to be negotiated vis-a-vis the regional geopolitics as we see it today. Moving on to my next question. This particular question actually is targeted towards Amya and Nicholas. So the Quad remains an informal grouping. As we've discussed IPEF right now, that IPEF will definitely lead economic teeth to it. In a sense, the Quad remains a strategic security dialogue, as Dr. Zack Cooper also mentioned in his opening remarks. Now, on this particular note, do you think that there's a possibility of any formalization plans on the lines of a formal security grouping in the future? And if so, if that could be the case, will it then be the nation ATO as China has made the Quad to be? And more importantly, do you think that this formalization option is something sensible as Quad moves forward with making sure and maneuvering all the geopolitical challenges as we see today? Amir, please go ahead.
You are on mute, Amir.
So I'd like to start by saying that Asia doesn't really do alliances. The concept of military alliance or a defensive alliance is quite transatlantic or a European thing. Well, Asia does regional agreements and partnerships much better. We can have examples from the RCEP. We can have examples from the RIC partnership. We can have examples such as the SCO partnerships. So my point is basically that Asia does regional agreements, regional partnerships, free trade agreements much better than it does military or defensive alliances. So, so what is the role of the Quad here? If the Quad cannot be a defensive alliance or probably a military alliance, what can it be? So we must understand that the US government has kind of limited its approach to the Indo-Pacific. In the recent budgetary allocation, the US government has quite, has kind of allocated budgetary resources to military spending, not really up to the mark. So therefore it follows that other panelists will have, other Quad countries will have to kind of pitch in to ensure the Quad's concept of a free and open Indo-Pacific. So I would say that rather than boxing the Quad into orthodox constructs of the Cold War, and I paraphrase Dr. Jaishankar here, I would probably look at the Quad as working or probably effectively functioning precisely because of its informality and precisely because of its flexibility. The very notion that the Quad doesn't have a bureaucratic structure and a secretariat, and it has a mechanism where all the 4 member countries can come together and convene at one place at a very, very short notice and probably to discuss emergency happenings in the Indo-Pacific is the very kind of structure that ensures that the Quad survives for a long time and goes much beyond its stated notion of ensuring a free and Indo-Pacific. And that was seen in the recent Quad summit held in Tokyo, where Quad member countries kind of emphasized on everything ranging from maritime domain awareness, cybersecurity, collaboration in emerging tech, collaboration in space awareness, and so on. So I believe that India especially would not want the Quad to be a military alliance. The US, Japan are already allies. The US, Australia already are allies. Australia and Japan already have a 2+2 dialogue and a mechanism for collaborating between their defense and foreign ministers. India and the US already have a comprehensive strategic global partnership. India and Australia already have significant trade ties. Japan is already a strategic partner of India and invests a lot in India's development through the form of aid. So I believe that with all these mechanisms already in place, there is no need to box the Quad into orthodox constructs such as a military alliance. It is better that the Quad evolve very naturally and organically rather than kind of imposing the requirements what European or North American analysts or probably experts would like the Quad to be. So I believe that rather than kind of just imposing upon countries, upon middle powers like India, the importance of the Quad being or not being a military alliance, it would be better that all the 4 member nations and all the 4 kind of the leadership, the political and the kind of the foreign ministers leadership in all these nations, they ensure that the Quad grows organically and goes in the direction that it is headed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amir. Extremely well put. Let's hear from Nick now. What does he think about this particular question?
Yes, I think Amir brought a very brilliant, beautiful point. Not only just looking at recent trends of boxing in these countries into a more Western-oriented construct of military alliance, but also have to look at the historical perspective. While obviously Western nations have a long history interacting with each other, and quite honestly a necessity to do so, considering their geopolitical proximity to each other. East Asian nations such as Japan, China, India have a different geopolitical reality where more historically they kind of have a tacit agreement to kind of leave each other alone and worry more about consolidating domestic concerns. We've seen this obviously with China closing its borders off, Japan with the Sakoku during the Tokugawa era. However, like with recent trends, there might need to be a reconsideration as dealing with other countries has become a necessity, especially with growing globalism. And also, as Amia said before, how the mechanisms are in place for the Quad to become a strategic security alliance. It's a little, one ingredient that is missing is time. As we see the US and Japan alliance, it has a long history since 1945 in the US occupation to build up to its indefatigable alliance as it is today. There are many ups and downs. Both nations have to both prove their resolve that they should rely on each other. That being said, I think there is a wariness with these countries, with the US being a leader in the Quad, especially in terms of military alliance. Even though President Biden has been putting great effort in demonstrating his resolve to make the US participate in the Indo-Pacific, I don't think there's a guarantee that he will remain, his mandate will remain in the US for a second term, especially with the pessimism surrounding his administration in the midterm elections, or that his successor will share his same vision. And so the US has some way to kind of gain the confidence of other Quad members, especially India. Nevertheless, I think it should be considered that Asian issues such as a Taiwan contingency or a Korean missile test are very much bipartisan in Washington, and that members can expect consistency from the US in the future. Moreover, as Chinese adventurism and military buildup in the South and East China Sea, and as well as the North Korean testing ICBM missiles continues to change the security environment in the region, one would be hard-pressed not to see the Quad evolve into a military grouping. Looking at Japan, the country has had a long Pacific rhetoric with its security region with the US, or ANPO, making it rely on US for military security since 1960. And also, there's been a long-running public consensus that the country should maintain this pacifistic stance. However, with the now popular consensus have been shifting, as seen with the mandate supporting popular mandate supporting Prime Minister Yoshida's efforts in expanding Japan's increase in military spending from 1% to 2% of its GDP, as well as revising its 9-year-old grant strategy, and again, all with public support. So I think there is a possibility for a security grouping in the future if trends continue to go this way. But as Mia said, it shouldn't necessarily be a rigid stance, but rather come out naturally as to acclimate to the reality of a security situation, rather than just opposing Western thought and ideology that you can't necessarily impose in the region.
Thank you so much, Nick. Since we're short on time, I would like now to quickly move on to our question and answer segment with our audience, for which I would like to invite Dr. Shashank Shekhar Shukla to please take over. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much, Bhabdi, for the excellent moderation. Now, there have been many lovely questions in the chat box, and I would, the format that we'll follow for the next 10 odd minutes is that I'll put across the question, not specifically to any one panel member. So I would actually invite the panel members to jump in, right, and answer the question if they feel that that is pertaining to them. The first question is by Alok, right, wherein he asks, right, should India try to contain China, just like what is happening as per what seems a Chinese strategy of string of pearls, ring of fire, right? Should India consciously try to do that, and the role of Quad in it? So any of the panelists, before I'm forced to nominate someone. Amia, why don't you? Okay, Pan.
Sorry. Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to jump in real quick and say that perhaps the answer is no. I don't think that India should actively and consciously contain China. For one, I think China has been one of the most self-contained countries. I think it's going to be very hard to contain China in a sense whereby we can truly keep them at bay, right? I think that's just the first point I would like to make. The second point on why I think that India's strategic ambiguity or strategic alliance or in a way in which India chooses its side should be one of engagement instead of containment. So General Wei Fenghe, the State Council Minister for National Defense, the PRC, recently spoke at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore just this weekend. And I think he made China's agenda very, very clear. I'm going to quote three really short quotes on what he said with respect to China's outlook into the region, right, and its own security. So he says that China enhances national defense in order to meet the legitimate needs to defend its own security as well as contribute to the world force for peace, right? The second is that the Chinese military is dedicated to safeguarding national sovereignty, security, and development interests. And the last point, which is really the one that got everyone alarmed, was that the PLA vows not to yield a single inch of the country's sacred land, alluding in this case to Taiwan, but it shall not seize anything from others either. The PLA has no intentions to cause any trouble, but it is not afraid to face up to troubles. Should anyone risk crossing the bottom line, the PLA will resolutely take action and defeat all enemies. This was also in response to Secretary of Defense Austin's remarks in the Shangri-La Dialogue, which was also accusing China of its aggressive behaviors within the region as well. And so I think that there must be a careful deliberation in which engagement should be at the forefront, right? And how we engage China in a way in which brings China to the region instead of making China feel threatened or pushed back within its own backyard. So I think I'm going to leave my comments at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tavis, for a detailed and a very nuanced response to a provocative question, right? The next question was put forth by Indranil. Is China alarmed by the Quad? And although meaning it is kind of a self-explanatory question, right? And there are enough indications from China that China, even though it's not alarmed, right, is definitely not right with the and does not agree, right, with the Quad grouping person. It has said that at multiple forums. So I will leave that question at that. Moving on to Siddhi, who has put forth to the panelists, how can Quad members engage better? Because apart from these 2+2 dialogues or 4+4 dialogues and these various meetings, right, that happen periodically, the sustained engagement, right, is something which is missing per se. So Siddhi would like the panelists to weigh in on how can that be addressed, if at all. Upma, would you like to talk about that? That seems to be your forte.
I would just like to add that through Quad, India can push forward its interests among the Quad nations and also strengthen its bilateral ties with other Quad nations. And Quad has given India a platform to strengthen its ties with Australia, with Japan, with the US. And engagement, I see more trilateral and bilateral.
Yep. Okay. Anybody like this? Okay, moving on, right, to another burning topic, right? And there is a question from a Taiwan fellow whom I can, the notation is just G, right? And Anna Floria also both asked, right, what would be the potential Quad response to an aggression towards Taiwan in particular and to other maritime interests of other nations in the South China Sea? So, any thoughts?
If I may, I'd like to take this question. Thank you. I think the time has passed that even though the U.S. remains a highly reputable military force in the globe, it's no longer the case that it can single-handedly and substantially maintain its interests in the Eastern theater. The truth of the matter is the rise of Chinese prominence has made maintaining the presence of the region much more costly and ineffective. And Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin in the Stronger League dialogue kind of touches on the facts when he described a multi-pronged approach that Washington is going to undertake in the region. One of them being to step up the complexity, jointness, and scale combined exercises with its allies and partners to increase to work with each other can not only deter China from not only deter precipitation in a Taiwan contingency, but also may deter China from making any more bold or aggressive moves. That being said, I also think it's crucial, which is another approach from that Lloyd Austin mentioned, that countries in the Quad need to enhance their own securities. Looking for Japan to host a number of U.S. military bases. If the Quad members were to respond to a Taiwan contingency, it is important that those bases remain effective. So even though we want to avoid any confrontation with China, I think it's crucial that we maintain the defensive of members in the region for protecting their integrity and their sovereignty. Would definitely help at least making the region become even more stabilized, especially again with any escalations regarding China or North Korea.
So much, Nick. Building on what was put forth by Nick and the discussion till now, there are a couple of kind of joined at the hip kind of questions from Siddhi and Alok again. What Alok says is, given the history of what happened in Afghanistan, now things seem to be turning against Ukraine, right, in the Ukrainian war, and the unwillingness of the Biden administration to do something substantive other than send across some arms shipments. Can US be trusted? Was the question from Alok. Building on that, what he's saying is that if US can be trusted, then why was AUKUS formed? Is it a way to kind of hedge against the non-alliance nature of India? What is it, or is it kind of an Anglo-Saxon version of NATO? What exactly is AUKUS? So I would like the panelists to take these two questions in tandem.
I'd like to take that up with your permission, Shashank.
Yes, Kamla, please.
So referring to the first question which Alok raised about whether the US is reliable or not. So I believe that it is very difficult, or rather impractical, for countries to stereotype whether other countries are reliable or not. I guess when you clap with both hands, right? So I mean, when the question of reliability, it comes from both sides. So I guess when it comes to the question of the United States and India's relationship, both of them have to travel the minimum distance required to come at one common point and ensure that there is commonality of vision and there is commonality of goals. And I believe that the Quad is that very mechanism which ensures commonality of vision. So when the Quad was as a
this question, because I believe that is his area of expertise. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Shashank, and thank you for posing this question to me. See, though terrorism has been highlighted as one of the main areas of concern and cooperation when it comes to Quad, the design or the framework or the blueprint as to how this counter-terrorism measures can be achieved has been loosely defined. In 2019, we have seen CTTTX, the counter-terrorism tabletop exercise, in which the NIA has engaged with partners, Quad partners, but much of it is yet to be materialized. And a lot of discussions centered around counter-terrorism are largely strategic and not tactical. So what can Quad do with regards to this? When it comes to especially counter radicalization and counter narratives to terrorism, we need more a regional approach rather than one that is based on common threat perceptions in Indo-Pacific, especially in South Asia and Southeast Asia. And this is where I also believe the Quad Plus countries can engage. Bring in Bangladesh, bring in, other countries where we see high amount of terrorism, capacity building, best practices. And this is something, where Quad Plus can engage. But also where I also see divergence, a possibility of divergence is, it is very important that the, entire world and especially war on terror to over the horizon, counter-terrorism measures.
He says he doesn't really mean only in geographic terms. He also means in metaphorical and also in civilizational terms. So it means that it is the confluence of the four democracies who are coming together, who are like-minded in nature, who share values, and who also have some kind of a respect and adherence to the rules-based international order. So I believe that the question of reliability will be kind of seen in the days to come when India and the United States, both as well as the other two Quad countries, kind of come together on all the possible areas of collaboration and ensure that there is a strategic alignment to their long-term goals and priorities.
Thank you so much, Amya. Moving on to the last couple of questions. Devanshu has asked, how can Quad cooperate on terrorism? And I would like to invite Rohit to answer this question because I believe that is his area of expertise. Rohit?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Shashank, and thank you for posing this question to me. See, though terrorism has been highlighted as one of the main areas of concern and cooperation when it comes to Quad, the design or the framework or the blueprint as to how this counter-terrorism measures can be achieved has been loosely defined. In 2019, we have seen CTTTX, the counter-terrorism tabletop exercise, in which the NIA has engaged with partners, Quad partners, but much of it is yet to be materialized. And a lot of discussions centered around counter-terrorism are largely strategic and not tactical. So what can Quad do with regards to this? When it comes to especially counter-radicalization and counter-narratives to terrorism, we need more a regional approach rather than one that is based on common threat perceptions in Indo-Pacific, especially in South Asia and Southeast Asia. And this is where I also believe the Quad Plus countries can engage. Bring in Bangladesh, bring in, other countries where we see high amount of terrorism, capacity building, best practices. And this is something, where Quad Plus can engage. But also where I also see divergence, a possibility of divergence is, it is very important that the entire world and especially US has to realize that we have moved away from war on terror to over the horizon, counter-terrorism measures. What may come, at a chance of miscalculation is the fact that in July 2021, for example, the US has tried to form a quadrilateral grouping with Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Uzbekistan. So, if you are trying to bring peace to Afghanistan by partnering with a country which has a strong, strategic footprint there, I'm not sure how counter-terrorism measures work. And let me quickly point out, like recently we have seen, bomb blast in the Hamid Karzai International Airport during the withdrawal of US. And the person who goes by the name Abdul Rahman, the suicide bomber, was actually handed over by India in 2016 to the CIA. And back in 2016, Abdul Rahman, who happens to be an Afghan citizen, was planning bombings in India on behalf of ISIS, but at the behest of ISI. So the rapprochement between ISI and ISIS has been brokered by Azizullah Haqqani, who happens to be a close aide of Sirajuddin Haqqani, who is the Interior Minister of Afghanistan. And it came as a trade-off. The appointment of Umar Faruqi, who is closely related to LET or ISI. And in return, cessation of violence in Pakistan, tactical support, and we will give aid whenever you want. So it's important that West also tries to realize that ISI, ISIS, Al Qaeda, Taliban, these are enemies with benefits. So this is where we need much more dialogue, engagement, etc., etc. But nevertheless, lastly, I see more and more cooperation on the cyber front. Information sharing has been enhanced, especially bilaterally, but intelligence sharing, which is different from information sharing, we might see challenges and roadblocks given the fact that there is no framework. We also see more and more cooperation on technology front, technological transfers. There I try to close my arguments. Thank you, Shashank.
Thank you so much, Rohit, and thank you for touching upon Quad Plus, which was the question put forth by Rishika Pankaj. To bring it all together, I would like to put forth as the last question, a question by Professor Daya, wherein the Quad policies in the context and in the background of the Russia-Ukraine war. So somebody to weigh in that the geopolitics and the security architecture, the multipolar world order, right, is being blatantly challenged as we speak, right? What do the panelists see, right, as the Quad response, the learnings or the effect on Quad based on the ever-changing security dynamic that is unfolding as we speak?
Shashank, if I may quickly take up this question, it's very important to realize that the modern Russia-Ukraine war is redefining modern warfare. We didn't expect Ukraine to last this far, given that it is very asymmetric. I mean, given that it is asymmetric warfare, but we see strategic achievements on a daily basis when it comes to Ukraine. So one lesson that will be for entire world is just because you are not so mighty when compared to your counterpart doesn't mean you can win in a war, and that will that means that whenever if a country has intentions to go to war, you need a lot of strategic calculation. Before even Putin went to war, two things that I believe he emphasized, and to a large extent he also maybe failed to properly calculate, is strategic simulation and strategic patience. Russia has waited long enough before it went to war with Ukraine. It was waiting for a time where it thought, any position by Europe or NATO countries will only create divergence between them. But we see slowly, NATO uniting. Strategic simulation, all the equipment that has been, being used in Ukraine has been already used in Syria. This strategic calculation and strategic patience front has not worked much well to Russia. Lastly, the main lesson from this war is, for India especially, its position and how it can articulate any such positions in the future. Because in though I believe countries may understand eventually your position, it's very important that you try and articulate in the best ways possible. And I think that will be a great challenge for Indian diplomacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Rohit. I believe Tamari wants to weigh in on this, and then we'll close the panel. Tamari, if briefly you could share your views.
Yes, very quickly. I think for Quad itself, Russia-Ukraine war has been a learning lesson and has been kind of a promoting, if you put it that way. So Quad gained a little bit of attention, as well as India, and Quad can also learn from what NATO is doing at this point, and what strategy does Russia have. Because I also saw another question in the chat, how are we supposed to move away from Russia whenever they've been helping us very long? Russia and China seem to get very close in friendship, and I see them as having similar strategy. So if Quad is able to really examine the Russia strategy and how Ukraine is dealing with it, maybe then whenever China is actually having conflict with smaller countries or having conflict with Taiwan, then they can interject in a way that it's already been proven.
Thank you so much, Tamari. With that, we conclude the Youth Leaders panel. I would like to hereby thank all the panelists, the Youth Leader panelists, as well as the moderator, Bhavdeep Modi, for his excellent moderation. Thank you, everyone. We